Sure. So GLP-1 receptor agonists are already FDA approved for use in diabetes and for obesity. As these are the two main risk factors for MASLD and MASH, we're already using these drugs in patients with MASLD and MASH. There's a growing thought, and there's going to be data presented at this meeting, that these medications can reduce steatohepatitis, but also reduce fibrosis as well too. So these medications have already been in play in this patient population. And so one of the reasons why we did the study that we did is to look and see if these medications actually impact hard, measurable outcomes that patients are interested in. A lot of the studies that we do now collect more surrogate outcomes like fibrosis, regression, steatohepatitis resolution. But what we wanted to look at is to see if we can see if there's a signal for progression from compensated cirrhosis to decompensated cirrhosis, and if there's a signal for all-cause mortality. So the study that we presented earlier today is from the Target NASH cohort. Target NASH is a longitudinal observational cohort where we enroll patients with a diagnosis of NASH, now MASLD and MASH. And we classified them as having MASL, MASH, or cirrhosis on the back end based on either liver biopsy or some pragmatic clinical criteria. What we did in this study is, out of the 6,600 patients that we have enrolled in the study, wound up analyzing about 4,200. And of this cohort, 10% had been on a GLP-1 receptor agonist for at least 1 year. We looked at the patient population with compensated cirrhosis and looked to see how many of them progressed to decompensated cirrhosis. And what we found was that non-users of GLP-1 had an increased hazard of progression to decompensated cirrhosis. So 1.7 times the hazard for decompensation. For the all-cause mortality outcome, we looked at all patients, so MASL, MASH, and cirrhosis all combined, and looked at all-cause mortality. And here we found that non-users had a 2.28 times the hazard of progression to all-cause mortality. Other factors that led to all-cause mortality were sort of obvious things like age, diabetes, hypertension, that point to the internal consistency of our findings. Yeah, I think what this research shows us is that in real-world clinical practice, number one, we're already using these medications. And number two, we have a signal here that they will influence these sort of hard, patient-important outcomes like symptomatic liver disease, decompensated liver disease, like mortality. This real-world setting is both good and bad. It has advantages and disadvantages. It is likely more reflective of what our everyday clinical practice is. While clinical trials can give us efficacy, real-world data shows clinical effectiveness. And what that difference is the selection bias that's inherent in clinical trials is absent from real-world data. However, real-world data has some issues with it as well too: healthy user effect, residual confounding, things like that. But it is more and more and more evidence, all of it pointing in the same direction, that's complementary between clinical trial data and real-world data, that show that these medications do have a significant role in patients with MASLD and MASH.